In this lecture, we're going to learn about the STD pair type. And this is a type we can use to group two pieces of data and treat them as a single entity. And this type is going to provide two data members that we can use to get the pieces of data that are inside. So we can go through first and second to get our data. Here is a simple example of what an STD pair might look like. For example, we can store an ID and a name for a student inside, and the ID may act as our key, and the name might act as our value, and we might englobe these two pieces of data in an STD pair object. We can go through the first data member to access our ID. We can go through the second data member to access our name, which is really going to act as our value. This is the setup we might end up with if we try to use STD pair in our C++ application. So we are going to have to include the header that brings this in, and that happens to be utility. And here are a few examples of how we can work with STD pair. You create an STD pair by specifying the type for the key and the type for the value as template arguments here. And then you can put in data by using braced initialization as we see on the right here. So the 0 here is going to act as our key, and the text here is going to act as our value. And we might access these pieces of data using the first and second data members that we have in our STD pair type. Another way to create a pair is to use the STD make pair method, which is going to create a pair and return it. And the types are going to be deduced. For example, if we pass in an integer, the key is going to be of type int. If we pass in a piece of text, which is really a const char array, that's going to be the type for our value, and this is going to work pretty well. Now, if we want to print our pair directly with a syntax like this, this is not going to work because it doesn't have a stream output operator overloaded, but we can go through the first and second data members to print our data. So for example, here we can get the first item and the second item. The first item is going to be the key, the second item is going to be the value, and we're going to see our data printed out just like we do here. We can also go through the auto syntax and collect the members of our pair into variables. The way we do that is use the syntax like we do here. We say auto, we specify a pair of square brackets, and inside we're going to put two variables. One is going to be collecting the key, the other is going to be collecting the value, and we can assign our pair to this auto variable here. And when we do that, the key is going to show up in this int var, and the value is going to show up in this string var, and we're going to be able to access our data like this. And this syntax was introduced in C++ 17, I guess. So if you are using an older version of C++, you want to have access to this. But this is really cool, especially if we try to loop around std set and std maps trying to do things. That's why we are learning about STD pair in this lecture here. Another thing we can do is try and deduce the types by using a syntax like this. So we can say STD pair and say the name for the pair object, and then we're going to put in data, and the compiler is going to deduce the types for this STD pair object here. In this case, the key is going to be an integer, and the value is going to be an STD string because that's what we have right here. And if we print our data, we're going to see that this is the case. Now, it is also possible to store STD pair objects in a collection if that's what you want to do. Here we are just setting up a vector of STD pairs, and this is going to be confusing to beginners, but this is something you can do. You're going to get familiar with us, and we can put in pairs. Our pairs are going to be having a key, which is an integer, and a value, which is an STD string. So we can put our data here, and these things are going to be constructed in place and stored in our collection here. If we want, we can loop around using the range-based for loop like this. This is going to print our data. At each iteration, we're going to grab the first and second data members and print them out. And you're going to see that that's going to be the data we have in our collection here. We can also use the auto syntax, and this is going to be really cool. So we can say for auto and specify the key and value. And the key and value for each iteration are going to be collected in these variables here. And we can use them in the body of our range-based for loop. And this is going to be really cool. We can traverse our collection, printing each element which happens to be a pair using the syntax like this. And this is going to work really well. Okay, now that you know these things, let's head over to Visual Studio Code and play with this a little more. Here we are in our working folder. The current project is std pair. We will grab our template files pretty quick and put them in place. And we will open this up in Visual Studio Code by dragging and dropping here. This will give us our main CPP file that we can clean up a little bit. We are going to include the utility header, which contains the std pair type. Let's do that. And we are going to go down and create our std pair objects. Let's close the left sidebar here. We don't need it. So you can say std pair, specify the type for the key and the type for the value. Our key is going to be int, our value is going to be std string, and we can put in data just like this. Another way is to use the std make pair facility, and you can pass in the data, and the compiler is going to deduce the types for these template arguments that this pair object uses here. Let's try to hover over our thing, and we're going to see that the data was deduced as int and const car pointer. This is something we expected. Now that we have these std pair objects, we might want to print them and access the data that we have inside. One thing somebody might try to do is to do something like this and say, and if you try to do this, you're going to be in for a surprise because std pair doesn't implement an output stream operator, so this is going to fail. If you try to do this, you will get a compiler error. Let's pass this through our GCC compiler. You're going to see that this is going to fail. We don't have an output stream operator for the std pair object here. I want you to know this. Now, it is possible to explicitly access the data members of std pair, and we can do that right below here. So let's do that. We're going to say stdc out. We're going to print our pair 1, and we will say pair 1 first. This is going to print the key. And after we do that, we're going to say pair 1 second. That's going to print our value, and we're going to see our data printed out here. Let's pass this through our compiler. I don't think there is much to explain anymore. The build is good as you see here, so we can bring up a terminal window and try this out. Let's go down and say clear, and we're going to run Rooster, and we see that our pair 1 contains 0 and bookshelf, and pair 2 contains 1 and table. 0 is our key, and the data we have in second position is going to be our value here. This is how std pair objects work. Now, it is also possible to collect our key and value pieces of data in variables and directly use those variables with the syntax we have on line 21 here. So we say auto, we say a pair of square brackets, and then we're going to put in our variables that are going to collect our data. After we do that, we're going to assign our pair to this thing here. And the key is going to show up in this first variable. The value is going to show up in this second variable. And if we print them out like this, we will see our key and value printed out in these variables. Let's pass this through our GCC compiler. The build is going to be good as you see right here, so we can clear and run Rooster. If we do that using the auto syntax, we will see that the data is going to show up here. And this is really cool. This is a syntax you will see a lot in modern C++, so you should really familiarize yourself with this. It is also possible to try and let the compiler deduce the template arguments type for you. And we can do that using the syntax we have on line 30 here. So we say std pair, we don't specify any template argument. We're just going to put in the data. So the key is going to be this thing here, and the value is going to be this std string. The type for the key is going to be deduced to be int, and the type for the value is going to be deduced to be std string. And if we hover over student, we will see that that's actually the case here, and this is really cool. Now, once we have this, we can go through the first and second data members and try to access these pieces of data. And another thing I don't think I stressed enough is that first and second are data members. They are not member functions. It is very easy to confuse them with member functions and put parentheses after them when we use them in our code. That's not going to work. std pair has set them up as regular public data members, and that's how you should use them. Now, with this in place, we can try and run our program. Let's pass this through our GCC compiler. The build is good as you see, so we can clear and run Rooster, And once we do that, our ID is going to be this number. The student name is going to be our value. It is going to show up right here. And this is really cool. Now that we know about STD pair, we can even go a step further and set up a collection storing STD pairs if that's what we want in our C++ program. So here we are setting up an STD vector that is going to contain pairs whose key is going to be int and whose value is going to be STD string. You see we have a bunch of squiggly lines here because we don't have STD vector included in this file. We can do that right here on top. So let's include vector, and this will be available now. If we go down, the squiggly lines should go away, and we will store a bunch of STD pairs in here. One thing worth noting is that we have nested pairs of braces here, and each pair of braces is going to be representing a single pair. This is how we can initialize this thing, and this is going to work. Once we have our vector, we can traverse it using a range-based for loop. This is going to work. And we're going to be grabbing each element at each iteration. And each element at each iteration is really going to be a pair. So we can use the first and second data members to access elements at each iteration. And we will see our data printed out if we run this program here. Let's pass this through our compiler. The build is going to be good. So let's clear and run Rooster. If we go down, we will have our collection, and we are able to access each STD pair object and print the data from the inside, and this is really cool. Another thing we can do is use the craziness of modern C++ and use the auto syntax in our range-based for loop here. And the key value information at each iteration in our loop here is going to be collected in this key and value variables, and we can print them out. And this is going to give us the same thing we've seen before, but this syntax is much simpler because we don't have to call first and second. But if you like the first syntax here, feel free to use it. You are really free to use whatever makes sense for your application. My job here again is to make you aware of the possibilities. Let's pass this through our compiler. We're going to use GCC, and the build is going to be good. Down here we can clear and run Rooster, and we're going to see the same thing using syntax 2 here, and this is really cool. This is all I had to share in this lecture, giving you a smooth introduction to STD pair. This is a type you can use to collect two pieces of information in a single entity and manipulate that easily in your C++ program. You can access the data inside using first and second data members, or you can even use the auto syntax here, which is going to make things arguably much easier, but you are free to choose whatever makes your life easier as a C++ developer. We are going to stop here in this lecture. In the next one, we're going to learn about our very first associative container, and that's going to be std set. Go ahead and finish up here and meet me there.